The morning of March 30th, 1945, 29,000 feet above Nagoya, Japan. Staff Sergeant Andy Doty sat in the cramped tail gunner's position of a Boeing B-29 Superfortress, surrounded by plexiglass and machinery he'd only begun to understand. Through his gun sight's optical computing reticle, he watched the bomber formation ahead, keeping his twin 50 caliber machine guns pointed straight up. The rule was absolute. Never aim at another B-29. The men in those aircraft were nervous enough without seeing gun barrels tracking their every move. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Then the warning crackled over the intercom. Doty couldn't tell which crew member had shouted it. He didn't need to. Through the curved plexiglass, he saw it. A Mitsubishi, a 6M0 fighter, tearing through the formation from front to back, the pilot's face visible for a split second as the aircraft flashed past. Doty's hands moved to his control yoke. He tracked the target through his optical sight, the reticle's illuminated dots dancing across the Zero's fuselage. His thumbs pressed the firing buttons. The guns didn't fire where he aimed. They fired where a General Electric analog computer calculated the bullets needed to go. The computer, a 6-foot-long box of gears, gyroscopes, and electrical circuits hidden elsewhere in the bomber, was making 30 corrections per second. Airspeed, altitude, temperature, humidity, the speed and angle of the attacking fighter, the parallax between where Doty sat and where the guns actually pointed, gravity's pull on half-inch bullets travelling at 2,900 feet per second, the Zero shed pieces. Metal fragments glittered in the thin air as shell casings from Doty's guns rained down through the formation. The fighter tumbled past, trailing smoke. Doty fired again. The enemy aircraft was already dying, passing through a stream of tracer fire from other B-29 seconds, each gunner trusting a machine to do what human reflexes couldn't. Calculate the impossible geometry of aerial combat faster than thought itself. That was how the war began for Andy Doty. His first mission, his first kill, and he had no idea whether he'd actually hit anything or if the computer had done it for him. The distinction didn't matter anymore. In the spring of 1945, American gunners weren't aiming their weapons, they were operating them, watching glowing reticles, pressing thumb buttons, trusting electricity and mathematics to transform their intentions into lethal precision. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The crisis had been building since 1938, when Boeing began designing a bomber that would change everything. The United States Army Air Corps had watched Europe slide toward war and recognized a brutal truth. America's existing bombers couldn't reach far enough, fly high enough, or carry enough destruction to matter in the Pacific. The distances were too vast, the targets too remote. The B-17 Flying Fortress, already legendary, had a combat radius of barely 800 miles. Japan's empire stretched across 5,000 miles of ocean. Boeing's answer was the XB-29 Superfortress, a pressurized crew cabin so men could breathe at 30,000 feet without oxygen masks. 4 massive Wright R-3350 engines, each producing 2,200 horsepower, tricycle landing gear, instead of a tail wheel. A remote-controlled defensive armament system that would keep gunners inside the pressurized fuselage instead of freezing in open turrets. And at the heart of it all, 5 General Electric analog computers that would revolutionize air combat. The B-29's fire control system wasn't an improvement over existing bombers. It was a conceptual leap into a different kind of warfare. Previous heavy bombers like the B-17 and B-24 Liberator mounted gunners directly at their weapons. Each man sat or stood at his position, hands on the gun's spade grips, eyes scanning the sky, body exposed to temperatures that could reach -40 degrees Fahrenheit. The gunner aimed by eye, led the target by instinct, and hoped the enemy fighter flew into his stream of bullets. The B-29 eliminated all of that. 4 remotely controlled turrets, upper forward, upper rear, lower rear, each mounting 2 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, 5 sighting stations scattered through the bomber's length, nose position, upper central position in a rotating barber chair, left and right waist positions behind plexiglass blisters, and the tail gunner, the only man still physically at his guns, operating 2 50 caliber machine guns and initially a 20mm cannon through a direct optical sight. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Between the gunners and their weapons sat the computers, 5 identical units, each dedicated to a single sighting station. These weren't digital computers in any modern sense, no transistors, no integrated circuits. They were electromechanical marvels built by General Electric, designated the Model 2 CFR-55 B-1, each one a 6-foot long, 3-foot wide, 3-foot tall box weighing over 200 pounds. Inside, gears meshed with gears, gyroscopes spun, servo motors whirred. Electrical circuits calculated solutions to ballistic equations that would have required teams of human mathematicians working with slide rules and ballistic tables. The gunner's job transformed from marksman to operator. Sit in the pressurized cabin, comfortable at 30,000 feet where unprotected men would die in minutes. Peer through the plexiglass. Spot an incoming fighter. Center the illuminated reticle on the target and track it smoothly for a few seconds. The gun sight's 2 gyroscopes measured the target's angular velocity. The range wheel, manually adjusted, told the computer approximate distance. The navigator's handset, connected to each computer, fed in the bomber's indicated airspeed, barometric altitude, and outside air temperature. From these inputs, the computer calculated everything: true airspeed and density altitude, the lead angle required to intercept a target moving at 400 miles per hour, the bullet drop from gravity over 800 yards, wind drift, the parallax correction because the gunner sat 20 feet away from the guns he controlled. All of this processed 30 times per second, the computer's output driving servo motors that positioned the turrets not where the gunner aimed, but where the bullets needed to go to hit the target. The effectiveness was immediate and devastating. The B-29's computer-aimed guns had an effective range of 900 yards, 50% more than conventionally aimed weapons, more than twice the range of most Japanese fighter guns. A gunner with average ability could hit targets that would have required exceptional skill with traditional sights. The computer compensated for human limitations, smoothed out shaky tracking, and made expert marksmen out of men who'd completed 6 weeks of gunnery school. 4 companies competed for the contract in March 1940. Bendix, General Electric, Sperry, Westinghouse. The Army Air Corps hedged its bets, awarding primary development to Sperry while directing General Electric to create a backup system in case Sperry encountered delays. General Electric had built the first general-purpose electromechanical computer at MIT between 1928 and 1931, a differential analyzer based on Vannevar Bush's design. They understood analog computation. Sperry had decades of experience with fire control systems for naval, vessels and bombing equipment. By 1942, General Electric's system had proven superior, more reliable, easier to manufacture, better suited to the brutal conditions inside a combat aircraft. The production contract went to GE, and by July 1943, the first B-29 seconds rolled off assembly lines with the central fire control system installed. Each complete system cost $50,000 initially, though wartime mass production would drive that down to under $10,000 per unit. The technological leap wasn't just in the computers themselves. The entire system required electrical infrastructure that pushed 1940s engineering to its limits. 150 electric motors powered by 6 engine-driven generators per engine, 11 miles of wiring connecting components, Amplidyne motor generators converting electrical power to the precise voltages needed for servo control, Celsin synchros, rotating electrical transformers that transmitted angular positions from the gun sight to the turrets and back, creating the first true fly-by-wire weapons system. When the gunner moved his sight, voltage changes in the cellsin transmitted that motion electronically to the computer. The computer modified those signals based on its calculations and sent new voltages to cellsins in the turrets. The guns moved not where the sight pointed, but where mathematics dictated. If the computer failed or took damage, an override switch allowed direct control through a backup peep sight. But when the system worked, it transformed defensive gunnery from art into science. The integration of turrets added another layer of sophistication. Each gunner had primary control of one turret. The nose gunner controlled the upper forward turret primarily. The upper central gunner, designated the fire control officer, managed the entire system and could direct any combination of turrets. The left and right waist gunners each had primary control of their respective lower turrets, but through a series of transfer switches, any gunner could take secondary or even tertiary control of other turrets if they had a target and another gunner didn't. This flexibility proved crucial in combat. A fighter attacking from ahead would face the nose gunner's upper forward turret, but if the fire control officer also had a clear view, he could switch on the lower forward turret, bringing 4 guns to bear instead of 2. If the attack continued, passing under the bomber's nose and along the belly, the left or right waist gunner could take over the lower turrets without any interruption in fire. The computer tracked the target continuously, and the guns simply shifted from one controller to another. The system included logic safeguards that made it impossible to shoot your own aircraft. If a gunner tracked a target that would cause the guns to point at the B-29's wings, fuselage, tail, or another crew position, the computer overrode the command. The guns would slew up to the limit of their safe traverse, then stop. No matter how the gunner moved his sight, the weapons wouldn't fire into their own airplane. Loading and maintenance added complications. Each turret required regular access for ammunition loading, clearing jams, and servicing the mechanisms. But the turrets sat outside the pressurized crew compartment in the slipstream at -40 degrees and 29,000 feet. Ground crews handled loading before missions. In flight, if a gun jammed, it stayed jammed. The remoteness that kept gunners safe and comfortable also made repairs impossible at altitude. The lower forward turret included a unique feature. It could be retracted into the fuselage for landing, preventing the guns from striking the ground. The forward sight gunner had responsibility for rotating the turret rearward and deactivating it at the correct altitude. The turret would then automatically stow when the aircraft descended below a preset height, ensuring ground clearance during touchdown. By the spring of 1944, thousands of these systems were rolling through production. Singer Company's Elizabethport Works built the computers themselves, ramping up from initial prototypes to 250 complete computers per week by late 1944, over 500 per week by July 1945. Chrysler Corporation, which had mass-produced radar sets for the SCR-584 anti-aircraft system, wasn't involved with the B-29's fire control. This was purely General Electric's domain, with Singer providing the manufacturing muscle. The first B-29 seconds arrived in theatre in the spring of 1944. XXI Bomber Command, based in the Mariana Islands after bloody Marine and Army assaults captured Saipan, Tinian and Guam, began operations in November. The initial missions followed traditional strategic bombing doctrine: high altitude, precision targeting, daylight raids when possible. The bombers flew at 25 to 30,000 feet, where Japanese fighters struggled to reach them, and where the pressurized cabins kept crews comfortable and effective. The central fire control system performed exactly as designed. Japanese fighters that managed to climb to intercept altitude found themselves facing computer-directed fire from multiple turrets. The B-29's speed, nearly 350 miles per hour at altitude, meant fighters had limited time to close, aim, and fire before breaking away. And breaking away meant flying through the predicted kill zone, where the computers had already calculated the bullets would arrive. From November 1944 through the end of the war, B-29 gunners would claim 914 Japanese fighters destroyed, with 456 probably destroyed and 770 damaged. These numbers came from over 31,000 combat sorties. The loss rate told the story most clearly. 87 B-29 seconds lost to enemy aircraft. Less than 0.3% of all sorties. The computers worked, but the Japanese were learning. And what they were learning would force American gunners to trust their machines in ways no one had anticipated. Complete darkness, pure radar aiming, blind firing at targets they never saw. The transformation from visual marksman to electronic operator was about to take its final, most disturbing step. The Japanese recognized the threat in December 1944. Reconnaissance flights over the Marianas confirmed what intelligence officers had feared. Hundreds of B-29 seconds parked on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, the world's largest airbase being carved from Tinian's coral. American engineers transforming jungle islands into platforms for strategic destruction. The first major raids on Tokyo had begun in November. By December, Japanese fighter pilots were reporting disturbing patterns. The B-29 seconds flew higher than most fighters could effectively operate. They flew faster than aging Japanese interceptors could sustain, and their defensive fire exhibited impossible accuracy. Fighters attacking from beam positions faced coordinated fire from multiple turrets. Pilots making stern approaches discovered that the bombers' rear guns tracked them perfectly, opening fire at ranges that seemed to exceed the weapon's capabilities. Japanese aces who had survived years of combat found themselves facing an opponent that didn't rely on human reflexes. Major General Curtis LeMay arrived on Guam in January 1945 to take command of XXI Bomber Command. The previous commander had been fired for failing to produce results. High-altitude precision bombing wasn't working. The jet stream over Japan, winds exceeding 250 miles per hour at 23,000 feet, pushed bombs harmlessly into the ocean. B-29 seconds burned through fuel-fighting headwinds so severe that many ran dry and ditched before reaching the Marianas. Accuracy was abysmal. Resources were being wasted. Crews were dying in crashes and mechanical failures at rates that exceeded combat losses. LeMay studied the problem with the cold analytical mind that had earned him the nickname Iron Ass. The solution seemed insane. Strip the defensive armament from the bombers except for tail guns. Fly at night instead of day. Come in low, 5,000 to 9,000 feet, where the jet stream couldn't interfere and where bomb accuracy would improve dramatically. Load the aircraft with incendiaries instead of high explosives. Set Japan's cities on fire. The decision violated every principle of strategic bombing doctrine developed over Europe. It meant trusting that Japanese night fighter capability was weak enough that undefended bombers could survive. It meant deliberately targeting urban areas filled with wooden houses and paper screens that would burn like kindling. It meant accepting that tens of thousands of civilians would die. On the evening of March 9, 1945, 334 B-29 seconds lifted off from runways across the Marianas. Operation Meeting House. The target was a 3x4 square mile area of Tokyo, housing an estimated 750,000 people. Intelligence identified it as the heart of Japan's cottage industry, small factories scattered through residential neighborhoods producing parts for the war machine. The bombers came in low, so low that crews didn't need oxygen masks, low enough that the smell of burning city rose into the aircraft through gaps in the fuselage. Pathfinder B-29 seconds marked the target with napalm bombs in a giant flaming X. The main force followed, dropping 1,665 tons of incendiaries, M69 bombs. Cylinders of napalm and white phosphorus that scattered on impact and ignited everything they touched. The firestorm began within 30 minutes. Temperatures reached 1,800 degrees. Asphalt liquefied. Oxygen was sucked from the air into a vortex that generated winds exceeding 150 miles per hour. People who sought shelter in canals boiled alive as the water itself heated. Those who ran died from carbon monoxide poisoning as the fire consumed every molecule of breathable air. 16 square miles of Tokyo ceased to exist. Conservative estimates placed the death toll at 84,000. Some sources suggested over 100,000 died that night. 90 American airmen died. 14 B-29 seconds failed to return, a loss rate of 4.6%. LeMay had predicted 5%. The mathematics were brutal but undeniable. For the cost of 14 bombers, the United States had delivered destruction that exceeded any previous aerial attack in history. More people died in 6 hours than would die at Hiroshima, and the gunners on those missions learned something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. When Curtis LeMay ordered the defensive armament removed, he wasn't just making a tactical calculation about weight and fuel. He was acknowledging a truth that the crews already knew. The Japanese night fighter force was weak, poorly equipped, and disorganized. Coming in at low altitude in darkness, the B-29 seconds faced minimal threat from interception. But LeMay's order was controversial enough that he partially rescinded it. In his memoir Superfortress, he wrote, "At first, we had decided to take out the guns and gunners to make up for the shortage of airplanes. So flying these missions with half a crew was quite an emotional experience. Tampering with crew morale was something I did not want to do, and so the gunners went back in, but only with ammunition for the bottom turrets, and with searchlights as the only targets for them to shoot at. I was much more worried about B-29 seconds shooting at each other than I was about any fire we might receive from the ill-equipped and inexperienced Japanese night fighters." The gunners returned to their stations. But they sat at their sights, knowing their weapons were only partially loaded. They watched, the darkness below, tracking searchlight beams instead of enemy fighters. And they understood, perhaps more clearly than anyone, that the elaborate fire control system they'd trained months to operate had become largely irrelevant to the mission's success. The Japanese night fighter force that LeMay dismissed did exist, though it was everything he said: inadequate, poorly equipped, and desperately outnumbered. The Nakajima J-1N1 Gecko, Allied reporting name Irving, was Japan's primary twin-engine night fighter. A reconnaissance aircraft converted for interception duty, it mounted upward-firing 20mm cannons in a Schrager-Musick installation similar to what German night fighters used over Europe. The concept was brilliant. Approach from below, where bomber defensive guns had limited fields of fire, match speed and altitude. Fire upward into the wings and fuel tanks. The bomber crew would die without ever knowing a fighter was nearby. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Lieutenant Sachio Endo became an ace in the Gecko, credited with destroying 8 B-29 seconds and damaging another 8 before defensive gunners finally shot him down. Another crew claimed 5 B-29 seconds in a single night, but these spectacular successes were rare exceptions. The Gecko had adequate performance against B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds, but the B-29 cruised 50 miles per hour faster. Most Japanese night fighter crews could manage only a single pass before the Superfortress outran them, and without effective radar, finding the bombers in darkness was nearly impossible. The Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu, Allied name Nick, served as the Imperial Japanese Army's night fighter, twin-engine, two-seat, mounting heavy cannon armament. One Army unit claimed 150 victories, including 8 B-29 seconds in their first combat. But again, lack of radar and insufficient high-altitude performance crippled effectiveness. By spring 1945, American carrier-based fighters and P-51 Mustangs flying from Iwo Jima were escorting B-29 seconds over Japan in daylight. The Ki-45's career effectively ended. Even the legendary Zero tried night fighter operations. The A6M5S variant mounted a single 20mm cannon behind the pilot, aimed upward for Schrager-Musick attacks. But without radar, the modification proved nearly useless. Japanese pilots flew into darkness, with no electronic aids beyond visual searching. They relied on ground controllers to vector them toward bomber streams, then hoped to spot the B-29 seconds visually against clouds or stars. The odds were astronomical. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Japanese inability to defend against night attacks stemmed from fundamental technological gaps. Germany had developed effective centimeter-wave radar by 1943. The British deployed AI Mark 10 radar operating at 3 GHz, providing excellent resolution for night interception. American B-29 tail guns on later models would receive the AN/APG-15 radar for blind firing. Japan had none of this. Japanese radar development had proceeded along conventional paths using meter wavelength technology. When they captured British H-2S ground mapping radar sets and discovered centimeter wave operation was possible, the revelation came too late. Japan lacked the industrial capacity and technical expertise to close the gap during wartime. Their night fighters operated essentially blind, hunting by eye in three-dimensional darkness against bombers cruising at 300 miles per hour. The Nakajima J-1N Gecko carried Type 3 Mark 6 Model 4 radar in some variants. S-band search radar mounted in the nose for detecting surface vessels at night. But the resolution was poor, the range limited, and the system was designed for maritime operations rather than air interception. It gave crews early warning but insufficient accuracy for targeting. Other Geckos mounted searchlights in place of radar, illuminating bombers for visual attack. The tactic was suicidal. The searchlight made the fighter visible to every B-29 gunner in range. Turn on the light, hope to illuminate a target before defensive fire destroyed you. For American gunners, the night missions represented a psychological transformation. They sat at their sighting stations, staring into darkness, rarely seeing anything to shoot at. The computer-directed fire control system that seemed so revolutionary in daylight became an elaborate solution to a problem that barely existed at night. Japanese fighters almost never appeared. When they did, engagement happened so quickly that the sophisticated ballistic calculations made little difference. The tail gunner position remained critical, the only manned gun station, the only position where a gunner sat directly at his weapons. Early B-29 seconds mounted two 50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon in the tail. The cannon proved unreliable and was eventually removed, sometimes replaced by a third 50 caliber. Tail gunners operated independently from the central fire control system. They aimed and fired through direct optical sights, no computer assistance, pure marksmanship. And as the war progressed, a select group of B-29 seconds received something unprecedented: the AN/APG-15 radar gun-laying system, mounted in the tail turret, allowing the gunner to track and engage targets in complete darkness without ever seeing them visually. This was the final evolution of blind firing, the ultimate extension of automated combat, the moment when human vision became entirely optional for killing. The B-29B variant, produced exclusively by Bell Aircraft in Marietta, Georgia, from January through September 1945, embodied this new reality. 311 aircraft built, all defensive, armament removed except the tail turret, flush covers installed over the blister positions, no upper turrets, no lower turrets, no waist gunners, just the tail position, equipped with 350 caliber machine guns and the AN/APG-15B radar fire control system. The AN/APG-15B operated on S-band frequencies. It could automatically track approaching enemy aircraft and perform necessary calculations for firing solutions. The system connected to the General Electric computer and the IFF identification friend or foe units. In theory, it represented the pinnacle of defensive automation, a radar that detected targets, a computer that calculated leads, guns that fired where mathematics dictated. The gunner became an operator, monitoring screens and pressing triggers when the electronics indicated a target had entered kill range. In practice, the AN/APG-15B proved challenging and largely ineffective. The technology was temperamental, prone to failures, and difficult to maintain. Most aircraft had the system removed. The problem wasn't the concept. The problem was that 1945 radar technology hadn't matured enough to make blind firing reliable in a tail turret installation. The radar had insufficient range, inadequate resolution, and constant false contacts from ground clutter, weather, and electronic interference. But the crews who flew with operational APG-15 systems experienced something unprecedented. Sitting in the tail position, watching a radar scope instead of the sky, seeing a blip appear, the computer calculating engagement parameters automatically, the guns traversing to the computed intercept point, firing into empty darkness at a target the gunner never visually acquired, watching the blip disappear from the scope, hoping it represented a destroyed fighter rather than a radar malfunction or the target simply flying out of detection range. This was what Andy Doty and thousands of other B-29 gunners confronted through 1945, the transformation from skilled marksmen to system operators. From warriors who saw their enemies to technicians who trusted machines to identify, track, and destroy threats automatically. The psychological weight of this change was enormous and rarely discussed. The transformation from warriors to operators reached its absolute conclusion in Korea. November 1, 1950. Chinese forces crossed the Yalu River in massive numbers, driving United Nations troops into retreat. Worse, swept-wing MiG-15 jet fighters appeared in North Korean skies. Soviet pilots, veterans of the Eastern Front against the Luftwaffe, flying aircraft that outperformed everything the United States had in theater except the brand-new F-86 Sabre. The MiG-15 had been designed specifically as a bomber-destroyer. One 37mm cannon, two 23mm cannons. Heavy armament optimized for penetrating formations and killing large aircraft with short bursts. The swept-wing design, copied from captured German research, allowed the MiG to approach transonic speeds. It could climb faster than most American fighters, dive away from pursuit, and accelerate beyond anything propeller-driven aircraft could match. And the B-29, revolutionary in 1944, suddenly found itself obsolete. The superfortress cruised at 350 miles per hour. The MiG-15 could exceed 650. The B-29's service ceiling was 31,850 feet. The MiG operated comfortably at 50,000 feet, diving onto bomber formations from above. The Central Fire Control System's computers, calibrated for fighters that moved at 400 miles per hour, couldn't track targets moving half again as fast. Staff Sergeant Richard Oakley flew aboard a 19th Bombardment Group B-29 named the Outlaw during one of the first encounters with MiGs. The engagement happened so quickly that gunners barely registered the attackers before they were gone. Silver, darts flashing through the formation, cannon fire that ripped through aluminum like paper, then acceleration away from the bombers, beyond the range where defensive guns could track effectively. On April 12, 1951, Black Thursday, 30 MiG-15 seconds attacked 48 B-29 bombers, escorted by approximately 100 F-80, Shooting Stars and F-84 Thunderjets. The MiGs were fast enough to engage the bombers and extend away from the escorts before the American fighters could intercept. 3 B-29 seconds were destroyed. 7 more were damaged. No MiG losses. The attack demonstrated that daylight bombing over North Korea had become suicidal. Bomber Command suspended daylight raids for 3 months. When operations resumed, the B-29 seconds came at night. Small formations, low altitude when possible, radar navigation. The transformation that began over Japan in March 1945 became permanent doctrine. The superfortress, designed as a high-altitude daylight precision bomber, spent the Korean War operating in conditions its creators never anticipated. Tail gunner positions remained the critical defense. Unlike the remote turrets, the tail gunner sat directly at his weapons, operating independently from the Central Fire Control System. During the Korean War, B-29 tail guns received improved ammunition and, in some cases, the APG-15 radar that had been tested unsuccessfully during World War II. The technology had matured slightly, but the fundamental problem remained. Radar fire control in 1951 couldn't reliably track jet fighters moving at 600 miles per hour. Technical Sergeant Patterson flew multiple missions where MiG-15 seconds attacked his formation. He described one engagement where his guns ran down to fewer than 10 rounds each before the attack broke off. The arrival of F-86 Sabre escorts changed the equation. The swept-wing American fighter could match the MiG in performance. Once Sabres began flying top cover, MiG attacks became less frequent and less effective. But the psychological damage to bomber crews had already occurred. B-29 gunners in Korea faced something their World War II predecessors never confronted. Enemy fighters so fast that even the computers couldn't generate accurate firing solutions. The Central Fire Control System's analog calculators performed their computations based on assumptions about target speed and maneuverability. Those assumptions worked against piston engine fighters. They failed against jets that could change direction faster than the servo motors could slew the turrets. One night mission over Wonsan, crewman Allen reported multiple aircraft approaching at 6 o'clock. The unidentified contacts closed to 200 yards, then broke off. This pattern repeated for half an hour. Allen assumed they were friendly night fighters providing escort. Intelligence officers informed him the next day that no friendly aircraft had been in that area. The contacts were almost certainly MiG-15 seconds, and the reason they broke off without firing remains unknown. Perhaps the Soviet pilots couldn't identify the B-29 seconds positively in darkness. Perhaps they were testing intercept procedures. Perhaps they recognized that even at night, the tail guns represented a genuine threat at 200 yards. Over the 37 months of the Korean War, B-29 gunners were credited with shooting down 27 enemy aircraft. One of those kills was confirmed as a MiG-15, the only MiG-15 definitively destroyed by bomber defensive fire during the entire war. 78 B-29 seconds were lost, 57 to enemy action, 21 to operational accidents. The loss rate was far higher than World War II operations over Japan, despite the supposed superiority of the fire control system. The statistics revealed an uncomfortable truth. The most expensive weapons system of World War II, the $3 billion B-29 program with its revolutionary computer-directed defensive armament, had been rendered largely obsolete by a Soviet fighter that cost a fraction as much to develop and produce. The era of the heavy bomber defending itself with machine guns was ending. The future belonged to speed, altitude, and eventually stealth, not to computer-calculated gun-laying, but the psychological transformation the B-29 gunners experienced outlasted the aircraft itself. These men had been trained as marksmen. They'd spent weeks learning ballistics, deflection shooting, range estimation. Then they'd been placed behind computer systems that removed human skill from the equation. They'd watched their training become irrelevant as machines calculated firing solutions automatically. They'd experienced the disorienting reality of shooting at targets they never saw, trusting radar scopes and electronic signals instead of their eyes. And finally, over Korea, they'd discovered that even the machines had limitations, that automation couldn't overcome fundamental performance gaps, that computers calibrated for one type of threat became liabilities when the threat evolved beyond their design parameters. The gunners who flew in Korea understood something that doctrine hadn't yet accepted. The age of manned defensive armament on bombers was over. Post-war bomber development reflected this reality. The B-36 retained tail guns with an improved fire control system, but subsequent designs, the B-47, B-52, and beyond, abandoned the concept of multiple defensive positions. Tail guns only, or in later variants, no guns at all. The doctrine shifted to reliance on altitude, speed, electronic countermeasures, and fighter escort. The elaborate central fire control systems that had seemed so revolutionary in 1944 were recognized as solutions to a problem that no longer existed in the jet age. The central fire control system's true legacy wasn't in the kills it achieved or the bombers it protected. Its legacy was psychological and conceptual. It proved that automated weapons systems could work. That human skill could be supplemented, even replaced, by electronic computation. That the future of warfare belonged to whoever could process information faster and more accurately than the enemy. Modern air combat descended directly from the B-29's fire control system. Every surface-to-air missile system, every radar-guided weapon, every fly-by-wire aircraft control system embodied the same principle. Remove human limitations from the engagement cycle. Calculate faster than human reflexes. Fire with precision that exceeds human capability. The gunners who sat in their plexiglass blisters, watching illuminated reticles track targets through computational magic, were witnessing the birth of automated warfare. But they paid a psychological price that official histories rarely acknowledge. The transformation from craftsman to operator, from warrior who saw his enemy to technician who trusted machines, created a profound sense of dislocation. Testimonies from B-29 gunners, collected decades after the war, reveal recurring themes: uncertainty about whether they'd actually hit anything, disconnection from the act of killing, inability to process the experience emotionally because the experience itself seemed unreal. Andy Doty, the tail gunner whose first mission over Nagoya opened this story, flew his tour and survived. He returned to civilian life carrying memories that didn't fit conventional combat narratives. He'd fired at enemies he barely glimpsed. He'd trusted a computer to do what his training said required human skill. He'd been both protected and made obsolete by the same technology. The B-29 gunners who operated the central fire control system stood at a threshold in military history. Behind them lay centuries of warfare where human sight, human judgment, and human marksmanship determined outcomes. Ahead lay the present, where targeting systems process data from sensors humans can't perceive, calculate solutions humans couldn't compute, and engage threats at ranges where human vision is irrelevant. These gunners didn't just defend bombers. They demonstrated that wars could be fought by operators managing systems rather than by warriors wielding weapons. They proved that lethal precision was achievable through automation. They showed that the human role in combat could be reduced to monitoring displays, pressing buttons, and trusting calculations performed by machines. The irony is profound. The most advanced bomber of World War II, equipped with the most sophisticated defensive system ever created, taught its crews that their skills were becoming unnecessary. The computers that made them more effective also made them redundant. The technology that kept them alive was simultaneously making their profession obsolete. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The B-29's central fire control system marked the end of aerial gunnery as a martial art and the beginning of aerial combat as systems management. The gunners who operated it were the last generation to straddle that divide. They learned marksmanship but fought with computers. They trained as warriors but served as technicians. They started firing blind, trusting machines to calculate death with mathematical precision. And in doing so, they helped create the automated battlefield where victory belongs not to the brave or skilled, but to whoever builds better systems. The Germans never knew American radar devastated the Luftwaffe. The Japanese never fully understood the computers that directed fire against them. But the American gunners who operated these systems knew. They lived the transformation from warrior to operator. They experienced firsthand the moment when human skill became optional, when machines began calculating kill solutions faster than thought. When combat evolved from art to algorithm, that transformation, begun in the skies over Japan and Korea, continues today in forms those 1940s gunners couldn't have imagined. Drones operated from continents away, missiles that select their own targets, autonomous weapons systems that eliminate humans from the decision loop entirely. The path from the B-29's central fire control system to modern automated warfare runs straight and clear. And it started with gunners who learned to fire blind, to trust computers over their eyes, to become operators rather than warriors. They shot down enemies they never saw. They defended their aircraft with mathematics instead of marksmanship. They became, perhaps without fully understanding it, the first generation of automated warfighters. The future arrived in 1944, wrapped in analog computers and remote-controlled turrets, and the men who experienced it carried that strange knowledge for the rest of their lives. The knowledge that they had been, simultaneously, supremely capable and fundamentally unnecessary, protected by machines, made obsolete by machines, the last human gunners and the first automated operators, standing at the threshold between eras, firing blind into a future they were helping create. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.